talk to you today, and I want to discuss with you. So first of all, I'm going to talk at you a bit about what I've done, especially about war reporting and why Vietnam was important. Because Vietnam happened before you were born, right? Yeah. Okay. But one of the important jobs I had was in Saigon in 1970-71. And this man was then shot. Same with that there, he's shot by this is a South Vietnamese general. And there he is dead. This is the protests, which then started to build up. Now, in a minute, this is a very famous shot. Do you know what happened then? Yeah. It's called My Life. Remember this because I'm going to talk about it later on. So this was a war, Vietnam was a war which changed the way the public are informed about war, because never had they been informed about the war to this degree before, ever. For the first time, a war was covered more extensively by media than ever before. And the Americans were trying to Vietnamize the war, just as at the moment they're trying to get the Afghans to run their own war against the Taliban, just as they were trying to get the Iraqi troops to run their own war against who we don't know, the insurgents as they called them in Iraq. Limited success, and in the case of Vietnam, it failed. It failed horribly because the South Vietnamese army was corrupt. Maybe 1 million civilians, 800,000 is the figure given of civilians dead in this crazy war. And this is the awful thing about war, is civilian casualties. And as we will see in a minute, the picture of that little girl who was hit by napalm, and that picture did a lot to change American public opinion. So Americans were saying, are we doing that to little children? And that helped the Americans say, okay, we've got to get out of there. And as dreadful things happened in Afghanistan or happened in Iraq, they are going through the same process. Let's get out of here. But they need, a lot of this is because there are journalists, photographers, cameramen, TV people there reporting on a war. The military, faced with the fact there are lots of journalists, are trying to manage this because they obviously know they can't stop the military. Well, they can actually stop them getting too far, but they can stop the media getting perhaps all the information they want. But now the media is increasingly aggressive, increasingly saying, "I'm sorry, we want to get there." In Vietnam, the only way you could get around was by being accredited with the Americans. So it was a jungle war. And so for the jungle war, it wasn't sort of a big line with the good guys here and the bad guys there. It didn't work like that. It was a jungle war. It happened sometimes it would explode up there or explode here. It happened all over the place. And this is what made it very difficult for the Americans. And going to a country like this, where you had these lovely, gentle people next to this sort of Coca-Cola civilization, it was a bit of a contrast. We were not finding enemies. We were actually just trying to report the war as objectively as possible. Very difficult, considering the only source of information every day was the Americans. We could try and listen, we would listen to Radio Hanoi, broadcasting to try and put some balance on the story, but it would never really work out that well. And so we had to try and figure ways to tell the world what was happening in Vietnam. We would base 3/4, maybe 3/4 or more of our information came from the Americans. But then we would go out ourselves to look at various war fronts to try and get a feel for what has happened. Think about this. What the military are going to do? Because the military, they want to win the war. Quite reasonable. And that's not, it's just a fact. I'm not saying it's good or bad, it's a fact. They want to win the war. And to do that, they also have to win, we have an expression, hearts and minds. They want to win the hearts and minds of people back home. And so to do that, they want to sort of spread the good news and suppress the bad news. This meant that the American military had to be even more sophisticated in manipulating the media. Do you know the word manipulating? You know, basically making the reporters say what you want them to say. And they were really good at it. And if any of you are studying public relations, that's what they're good at. One of the typical things that the military do when there's a campaign starting up is to make the enemy look even more, to look like a monster. We call them demonizing, to make make them look like devils. Demonization? That's what we call demonization. So we were in the Second World War. It was even going then where we were told in the Second World War that the Germans, the First World War, the Germans were bayoneting babies. And in the Iraq War, there was a very famous incident. I'll just tell you briefly about it. You may have heard about it. In the first Iraq War, there was a story that Iraqi troops who invaded Kuwait, that they went into a hospital, into the antenatal ward, and unplugged the incubators for the babies, left the babies on the floors, and took the incubators back to Baghdad. Now that's enough to make anybody say they didn't do that, did they? These guys must be monsters. It didn't happen. What did happen was that a very sophisticated public relations company in Washington thought it up, because they wanted everybody in the States to hate the Iraqis for what they were doing. And so if you were sitting in Kansas or Tennessee and you'd heard this story, say, they must be really nasty people, these Iraqis, let's go in and, as we say, let's get in and kick ass. And when later on everybody found out that this was really a complete fabrication, they forget about it. It wasn't important. Those guys, you know, Saddam Hussein was a monster, and this is the kind of things that they do. We were told in the Iraq War that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, yes. And then when our Prime Minister, Tony Blair, suddenly got cold feet, he got worried that he was maybe not true. Then he said, they have weapons of mass destruction programs. So anyway, they changed it all along to try and make it easier. But so all the time the military have to lie. They have to lie to us, or manipulate. They invent stories, they inform and disinform. But the important thing is that you and I are a weapon for them. They want us to help them win the war. There'll always be tricks which the military use to make sure that their message gets across. For example, this would happen in Vietnam. Because they had a military spokesman. Every day, at 3 o'clock, there would be a press conference. And they would give out a press release, and they would say, in this battle, in this particular, this number of communist troops were killed, and this number of Americans were wounded or missing or whatever. And we could ask some questions, but we didn't get too much more information. But one thing the Americans would do, they might find maybe a new reporter who had just arrived in Saigon, and they would sort of maybe say, come on up, come to our headquarters and we'll give you a special briefing. And they would basically maybe give him a juicy bit of misinformation. And he would print it. He would race back home because he had a scoop, you know, scoop, exclusive. He had the exclusive report, so he'd get back and write his report, blast it off to the United States. And within 10 minutes, all the big news agencies would get, you know, the Boston Globe is saying this, where are you? And we would say, we have we don't know anything about this. But so we would call the spokesman and say, what's this? He said, I think it's an exaggeration. They would sort of either play it down, we have a saying in English that, well, the story had legs. It was already running, and you couldn't stop it. Okay, so stories get legs when it's been planted. Now, let's go to the side which we like, which is the journalist side. We'll look at things from the journalist's perspective. Do we put our opinion in news stories?
No.
Thank God. Okay, don't do it, please. But basically, if you are trying to do a good job, you are there to report facts. And you are there to tell your reader, I have found this fact, and I have done my best to make sure to see if it's true, and it's not like that, it's not like that. As far as I can gather, it's like that. Dear reader, and this is what I'm trying to give you. And dear reader, I have been out in the field in Vietnam, and the Americans say that there were 400 North Vietnamese killed. I couldn't count bodies. I saw maybe 1 or 2 bodies, but so all I could do is tell you, dear reader, that this is what the Americans claim, as opposed to, or the Americans say, and the way you write it was important. So you didn't say 400 communist troops died in a battle in Khe Sanh today. You didn't say that. Why not? Why not? No source. So if you said 400 communist troops died in a battle at Khe Sanh today, it's you who's saying it. But if you said the American military said today that 400 North Vietnamese troops died in a battle in Khe Sanh, well, that's different. They said it, not you. For my job with Reuters, it was really important to try and put some balance in your story. Because why? Reuters is an international news agency. It wasn't just going to British newspapers. It was going to all over the United States, all over South America. It was going to Havana. It was going to Moscow. It was going to Beijing. It was going to Hanoi. And so we couldn't use the word enemy. We would call them communist guerrillas or insurgents. We'd find a word which showed we weren't taking sides. Reader, dear reader, we're just trying to give you the information as much balance as we can do. Very difficult, because the main information was coming from the American military, and they wanted to win the war, and you couldn't say all the time, sorry, but that's a lie. You just couldn't do it every day, so you just had to report and try and get out there occasionally to see what is really happening. And so you've got you as a journalist have to decide how are you going to tell your readers about this. And so you have to find a way of writing it, which is clever, but then says, he said, not me, he said. And if you can check it out, great. But if you can't check it out, saying there was no independent way of proving all this. But on the other element is where are you in this story? Who do you believe? What do you tell your readers about what's happening? Are you going to be like the American for the Los Angeles Times, call them the enemy? Are you going to analyze what happens in a way that shows that you think maybe this guy's are winning or the other side are winning? It's difficult, and there's another even more difficult thing. If your country's soldiers are fighting, and you are saying they should not be fighting, the chances are you are not very popular. Your population is going to say, our soldiers are dying, and you say it's not right that they are dying? Who are you, please, journalists? In many ways, there are media organizations who say, give the public what they want. The public want good news, give them good news. Because we don't want rolling bad news. But on the other hand, increasingly, we in Britain have a very competitive press. So if one guy is saying, good news, these guys say, it ain't. And so we have, so it's very easy in the UK to get something of a balance between ways of looking at things. And so Vietnam showed that the military could not control all of the information. More and more that now they had to use even more sophisticated methods to try and manage the information. So if you are only repeating what the government is saying, it's easy to do it that way, but you have to at least try and check it out, check out the facts. So every good journalist, I hope that you have a contacts book that is pregnant with contacts, with just bursting with information and people you can call to find out something. So it might be the head of police, it might be the head of police's wife, because she might have another perspective on things. So as you get better and better at talking to people, asking good questions, but also meeting people, you can't just sit there and wait for news to come in. The government said this, that, everything comes in, and you just recite it and pass it out again. That's the easy way. That is so easy to do. And maybe some people will pat you on the head and say, well done. But, because sometimes you don't have time. You have to maybe write 10 stories in the space of 4 hours. And you don't have time to ring someone and say, is this right? But you've got to try. Or the lady in the shop where I buy my bread says that she had heard that there's going to be a strike among taxi drivers on that day. Automatically, bing, 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 your radar should be starting to turn fast. And you say, oh, interesting. So you then phone. You start phoning. And the company, the taxi company, no, all our people. But then you call the drivers. Or you call the drivers' trade union if there is one. You say, yeah, we're going to go on strike. And you've got the story. And you've got a source. So that's the really exciting stuff. When the journalists are the ones dictating what's in the story, because if 70% of the information is coming from someone else, who's controlling it? Journalists aren't, is it? So this is a people business. You've got to be able to talk to people. And you've got to like people. Some of your best friends must be people. And so you want it simple. I would tell my students, I want you to write news. I want you to have no more than 25 words in the first paragraph. I want you to have a minimum of punctuation, not lots of commas and dashes, because those are like road signs. They stop you reading. You want them to go right through the story as fast as they can, because your reader may be sitting on the bus with the newspaper, and if your story isn't really interesting, they will read it. They'll go and look at the sports or something else. So you've got to write beautiful English and write it very clear. You've got to use simple language. Sometimes journalists use a 7-syllable word just to show how intelligent they are. When actually,
no one understands it.
Yeah, of course. When a word of 2 syllables would do the job beautifully.